My name is Ralf Rodepeter. I'm the head of the BMW Museum here in Munich, next to the headquarters of BMW, where we started with a brand BMW now nearly 100 years ago, where our very first airplane engines were designed, constructed and tested. So the town of Munich was growing around this area where we still produce cars, where our headquarters is located, and also the BMW world on the other side of the road. We have, of course, also the museum. So the old part of the museum was opened in 1973, and it was a very new thing to build a museum for a brand. Nowadays it's more common in marketing to have brand museums, but when Karl Schwanzer, the architect of the museum, thought about the museum first, he said cars and motorcycles they were not built for a museum, they should be on the street. So he built a street inside the building to display the motorcycles and the cars. And when we were thinking about the new part of the BMW Museum, the much larger part nowadays, we took over this idea from Karl Schwanzer, more than 40 years old, and built again streets inside the building and houses, so that you have the feeling of walking through a town. And our exponents are displayed inside these houses. Each of these houses dedicated to one theme. Here we are standing in the House of Motorsport with one of the most important motorsport cars from the BMW history behind me. But of course you see other themes in our house, like the history of design, the history of motorcycles, the history of marketing itself also, and so on. The museum is designed that you as a visitor cannot even see the museum, but you feel it, of course. We have an architecture of perspective, so the lines of the house will lead you to the most important, the most beautiful exponents of the exhibition. The house itself is nearly away because we keep it in black and white and gray. The colors should come from our visitors, of course, and of the cars and motorcycles. So we want to pronounce the exhibition and not the design or the architecture of the house. But of course you feel the architecture, the beautiful architecture of the house, but you should not see it when you walk through the exhibition. In nearly all areas you can go very, very close to the cars and motorcycles. Only a few of them are hidden away to protect them because they are very fragile. But our idea was to let the guests really go close to the car. So we don't want to have a distance between the customers, the drivers of cars and motorcycles, and the exhibition itself. Nearly all the cars and the motorcycles you see here at the museum are took out nearly every year and sent to classic races, to classic rallies, to exhibitions. So the museum is not a garage for our cars and motorcycles. We want to put them out. It is very important for us that these cars are still running. Not one of the cars or motorcycles you see here is a fake. They are all working, and we use them every year again during the summertime. We use these cars for several racing. I think the most important, or the most important is the Mille Miglia, where we take part every year with around 10 or 12 cars here from the museum. And last year in 2010 we won with this car behind me again the Mille Miglia, like we did it 70 years ago with exactly the same car. And these are the stories what we like to tell to our visitors, because it makes it extremely lively. The museum is not something where we put something in it, it stands there for the rest of the life of the exhibition. We have a part of the museum that gives temporary exhibitions, where we have around 2 or 3 exhibitions a year, and we have a permanent part of the exhibition where we talk about the history, as I said before, about the themes, where we come from, what we are doing. But 1,000 square meters are reserved for actual themes, where we at the moment, the art car exhibition, we had an exhibition about architecture, we had an exhibition about concept vehicles from the past until actual concept vehicles. The very first product of the brand BMW was an aircraft engine from 1970, and this engine yeah, in airplane design, lightweight was a very important thing from the beginning. Of course, nobody was talking about pollution of the environment, but it was important for an airplane to fly high and wide. So efficiency of engines was always in our genes. Our very first product was extremely efficient. Then in the 20s we entered the motorcycle market with our very first motorcycle, with the R32, very beautiful motorcycle, of course also displayed here in the house. And then at the end of the 20s of the last century we built our very first car, because we had not the knowledge of building car. It was a licensed product from an Austin 7, from a British brand with our engine in. So from 1928 on we produced cars, but motorcycles were more important in that time. During the Second World War again we pronounced more the aircraft engine construction, and then after the Second World War BMW concentrated more on the car market. And with the 60s where we founded the strategy of building the 3 Series, 5 Series, 6 and 7 Series, which is still the strategy of the company. Of course we add a 1 Series, X Series, a Z Series, but the basic strategy from the 60s, 70s is still in there, because it was obviously a very good strategy. And yeah, ending up in this museum not with a presence, but we give some insights also into the future of BMW, how the design may look in the future, what are the ideas our colleagues from the engineering department working on. And so we want to draw lines from the past of the brand BMW through the history and also into the future, to give lines to understand perhaps for our guests why we are doing some things and perhaps also why we are not doing some other things. Coming from a past like the brand BMW, which is interesting, and yeah, we have done something in the past, but we have also led something in the past. And this strategy was working very well with the company, and so this story is told here in the BMW Museum. As my colleagues often said, the museum is the front stage, but of course we have also a backstage. We have workshops where we build the cars, we rebuild the cars, we restore, we renovate the cars. We do that also for customers, not only for our own collection. And of course we have a huge storage where we store a lot of more cars. We have around 600 cars and 200 motorcycles here in Munich, which are not all shown at the museum, but we use these cars and this department, the backstage, to prepare the cars for the races, prepare new cars for the museum or for other exhibitions, send them around in the world, because not everybody is coming to Munich, so we have to go to them with the cars, and that is done by my colleagues at the Classic Center with the workshops.
Hello, my name is Manfred Kuhn and I'm the spokesperson for Heritage Subject at the BMW Group. We're standing right in front of a 507, probably one of the most beautiful cars ever built. First of all, it's a two-seater, open two-seater, what we call a Roadster, of course. And the car has a really spectacular history. BMW was very, very successful with the 328 in the pre-war times. So after the war, in the beginning of the 1950s, we begin to think about the next Roadster, the follower of the 328. The result was the 507. But there was a prototype shown up in 1954, and the management was quite happy with the car. But there was one person additionally at that preview date, and that was Maxi Hoffman, the importer of BMW cars in the United States, and he said, "Oh, I love the car, but it looks like an English car, and I have a lot of English cars in the United States. I can't sell any of them." So they thought about, oh, we should change probably the design, and at the end he not only wanted to change the design, he also changed the designer and brought one person in the whole business, which is combined from that time on with the 507. It's Albrecht Graf Goertz, a very young designer at that time, a German one who lived in the United States, actually in New York, and he designed the 507. Finally, at the Frankfurt Motor Show in 1955, it was the debut of the car, and it was the media called it the dream from the ISA and Munich dream car. So it was a full success at that time. The car was only built up 251 times. And there you see that it's not a really big economical success. It's a V8 engine, lightweight engine from 100 and around about approximately 150 horsepower. 200 kilometers an hour shouldn't be a problem up to today. There are two different model lines. The first 50 ones are called the Series 1. It's a bit uncomfortable to sit in because the seat is a little bit more in front, and then the other 200 approximately are a little bit laid back more, and so it's a little bit more convenient to drive in. Behind me you see one of the icons of BMW car history. It's the BMW M1, the founder of the M story, or as he called, the most sportive leather of the world. The M1, the idea of the M1 is a little bit older than the M1 itself. It began actually at the beginning of the 1970s, where the idea of a two-seater sports car, super sports car, was born. It first was get out a concept car called BMW Turbo, that idea of that to produce the car, the turbo car, was stopped immediately after the world energy crisis in 1973. But in the 1975, 76, the idea occurred again, and then it was Jochen Neerpasch, the head of BMW M GmbH, or it was called BMW Motorsport GmbH at that time. He was the father of the M1, and his idea was to make something like a lean production car out of it. So we just have the idea for the car, we planned the car, we developed the car, but it was produced somewhere else. The idea was at Lamborghini. It was designed somewhere else. It was Ital design, or better known Giugiaro, of course, and it should be the production car for racing cars, especially in the Group A at that time. So it sounds like a good idea, but as always, the problems start very soon. Lamborghini had some problems to build up the prototype, so Neerpasch drove down to Italy, took all the plans, and went to Bauer at Stuttgart, a supplier we often worked together since the 1950s, and asked them to build the car, and they said yes and built the car actually, but we lost a little time, so we were only able to present the car in 1978 in Paris, the Paris Motor Show, but at that time we had a quite finished racing car. So we're not so sure what we should do now, because the racing car wasn't allowed to drive because we had two less production cars for the homologation. So we need about 200 homologation cars. So Neerpasch and his crew had a really fabulous idea. They founded the so-called Pro Car series, BMW M1 Pro Car. It was, to say it roughly, the day before the Formula One racing at the European Grand Prix. The five fastest Formula One pilots racing versus 20 private pilots, all in an M1 Pro car. I mean, something which would be completely impossible today, but at that time it worked. So we got that really tremendous pictures from pro cars driving in Monte Carlo, and so that made the car very, very, very successful and very famous. The normal production cars were produced up to 1981, round about, let's say, 450 cars, 399 production cars, the rest racing cars. There were some Group A cars, so normal pro cars, and then again some bigger ones, especially one of Schnitzer with about 850 horsepower. The car itself doesn't make any sense at all. You sit inside like, yeah, you're a little bit not in a comfortable way. It gets very warm because the engine is right behind you. It's very loud, so you won't miss the radio. You have problems to get in. You have problems to get out of the car, but you can believe me, it's one of the best feelings you can have driving that. And behind me you see a very important step in the history of BMW. It's the so-called 3.0 SI, or the short number was the E3. That was the internal number the car gets. That is at the end the predecessor of the 7 Series. I mean, the next generation of the car is the first 7 Series, also called the first 7 Series. And it was a quite revolution for BMW because the cars before that E3 are 335 and the so-called Baroque Angel 501 and 502. And these were kind of luxury cars, but not very sporty cars, let's say this way, more that chauffeur thing. And that one was then shown as a self-driving luxury car. And that was the idea behind it, and that was the idea we followed up to the recent 7 Series, that it's sportiness and luxury don't have to work against each other, but work together for a certain thing which we call the driving pleasure at the end. And the car was shown in 1968, the first car of that lineup, and was produced until 1977. And it's again the presentation of the 6-cylinder after over 10 years without a 6-cylinder at BMW, to underline the heritage, because the 6-cylinder heritage of BMW in the pre-war time is very, very important. And as we know now, it has become even more important after these generations. It's, by the way, the same engine as we know it from the big coupes, the so-called E9 coupes, or the most important car is, of course, the 3.0 CSI. The car is a kind of, I would say, high-class car, but it's something very uncommon at that time for BMW. At the same time, we have a 02 series, we have a new class series. I mean, we are very important for that middle class car, which are very sporty, but at the end, a kind of premium, we would call it today. And that's why that was a kind of risk BMW is going on, because it was not a really economical thing or economical success, the 335, and of course not as well as the 501 and 502. But everyone at BMW knew at that time we need to kind of upper class car to show up the whole range what we are used to since the pre-war times. And yeah, they were right. The optimists were right again, so it was a big success, and it was a big re-entry of BMW in the luxury class. And beside me you see one of our icons. It's a BMW 3.0 CSI, or as it was internal called the so-called E9. The whole model range was started in 1968 with a 2800 CS, then a 3.0 CS, CSI, and at least one of the most known cars of BMW, the 3.0 CSL, the lightweight version of that car with a big wing in the rear, in the United States also well known as so-called Batmobile. So in comparison to the CSI, which was a very sporty car, that was more the elegant version of that big coupe, which is a predecessor of the 6 Series, of course. And this car wears all the, let's say, design genes where we still follow up today. It's the laid-back greenhouse. It's the design underlining of the rear-wheel drive, the short places before and in front of the wheels. So it's a very sporty design, very functional, but also very elegant. And this is a little bit the myth of that car. You see it, you love it, but at the end you have no idea why it is that beautiful. And that's why it's an icon, and that's why it's very iconographic for BMW design all over the lifetime, I would say. It's about hardly 30,000 times produced, and the engines are only 6-cylinder engines, starting from 2.8 liters, 8 liters, up to 3.0 and 3.2 liters. The racing version 3.5 liters, turbocharged sometimes. So we're talking about 180 up to 200 horsepower, and in the racing versions, sometimes you see the 450 when you're talking about the horsepower, but these are racing engines. A very sporty way. That means you didn't belong to the slower ones on the roads at that time, but it's not that offensive as sometimes you might think the car was. It's more elegant, and the color we see here is of course a kind of lifestyle of the 1960s and 70s. Beside me you see a Roadster from the 1930s, one of the beginning of the Roadster tradition of BMW. It's a BMW 315/1. Actually, the car was built for motorsports, a fast two-seater, quite light, and it was presented in 1934 up to 1935. It had 40 horsepower, and there was a kind of evolution. It's called a 319/1, looked quite the same, with a little bit more horsepower, 50 horsepower, 10 horsepower more. The car was especially shown at national racing events. It was quite successful, but it made the BMW management a little bit more optimistic about racing at all. So it's a very important role. It's not the victories the car showed up, but it's more the beginning of an evolution which brought some wonderful cars like a 328 and a 507. So without that one, we never would have seen a 328 or a 507 or a Z3, Z8, or I don't know. That car, which we see here, is a little bit a kind of seldom story, or I would say kind of tragic story, because as far as I know, the car has always been in the museum since 1973. All the other cars were around and did what they are really made for, and that one had to stay from 1973 up to now in the museum. Probably it's used to at the moment, but on the other hand, it's a kind of eye-catcher with that bicolored blue and a yellow color. But it's, let's say, the other way around, that car which knows the museum probably the best. And behind me you see a BMW 328 from 1937. The BMW 328 is of course one of the most popular cars of BMW. It was the idea to find a racing car which would have been internationally competitive, and finally in 1936 our colleagues at that time did it and found a solution how to combine that 2-liter 6-cylinder engine with that small body and get out a very sporty 2-seater car. The presentation of the car was as easy as astonishing. It just was the start at the Nürburgring at a race. Ernst Henne, at that time the world record holder for BMW with the motorcycle world speed record, he was the pilot and just started at the Nürburgring, won the race, and then the car was presented. So very interesting way to present cars, but it was that interesting that at the beginning there were only 2 cars were existing, and they raced around Europe at every racetrack, won quite everything in the 2-liter class, and the first really selling car was then, or production car was then sold in 1937, produced up to 1939, and the racing versions, the Mille Miglia versions, were even more famous than the production cars. We are talking about a 2-liter 6-cylinder engine, 80 horsepower, at a weight of approximately 790 kilograms. So that sounds to us today a little bit, slow, but you can believe me, if you're driving the car, it's Yeah, unforgettable. If you can feel something like a driving pleasure in a car, then in a BMW 328. I mean, it's something very, very special. The car is produced 464 times, and there's one little story which shows you the meaning of the car. In 1960s, BMW made a kind of customer survey, and it was called a psychologic customer survey. So the people were brought to a place where they filled out some forms, and they were brought in a BMW car by a chauffeur, and the chauffeur began to talk about something. And the interview was the most important thing of the survey, not the fill out of the forms. And one of the questions there was, what is for you the most BMW car? Which car represents most genes of BMW? We're talking about 1964. And the most given answer was a 328. I mean, we're talking then about a car which was produced only 464 times, over 25 years out of production, the Second World War in between that. And the people remembered that car. I mean, that was the start of rethinking about the BMW production and portfolio, and the 2002, probably the 02 series, is the first result of that rethinking. And there were even advertisements in the 1960s with only shown a BMW 328 from the 1930s, and there was only role model under that. And so there you can see how important the car was from the beginning on to us. And now we show it in the museum, but we also raced the Mille Miglia with the car.